Today, we're going to look at something you use every single day, but probably don't know the full story behind.
Ooh, mysterious.
I'm intrigued. It's the graphical user interface, the GUI. You know, windows, icons, mouse, all that stuff that makes computers, well, user-friendly.
Ah, the GUI. Yeah, I mean, can you imagine using a computer without it?
Right, exactly. But did Steve Jobs and Bill Gates actually steal this revolutionary interface? That's what we're going to try to unpack today.
Juicy.
Yeah, we've got some really interesting sources for this deep dive. Excerpts from Pasted Text, The Birth of the Tech Rivalry. And there's this really cool YouTube video called The Xerox Thieves, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Should be interesting to see what they say.
I've heard some whispers about this whole Xerox thing. Sounds like there's a lot more to the story than most people realize.
Oh yeah, buckle up, because this is where the history of personal computing gets really interesting. So to get started, picture this. Late 60s, early 70s, Xerox. They're the kings of, well, copiers. Just rolling in it.
Back when copiers were like the cutting edge.
Right. But their patents are starting to expire. Competition is heating up. So what do? They create Xerox PARC, this research center in Palo Alto, California.
I've heard of PARC. Didn't they come up with some pretty mind-blowing stuff?
Oh yeah, they basically gave all these brilliant minds free rein to, dream up the future.
And they were successful.
Oh, wildly successful. But it's kind of ironic, actually. Xerox basically funded the very technologies that would disrupt their own core business.
That's interesting. Kind of like shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. So at PARC, you've got the birth of the GI, along with other game changers like Ethernet and a laser printer.
Wow, so they were way ahead of their time. But why didn't Xerox capitalize on all this?
That's the million-dollar question. Let's talk about the GUI for a second. Why was it such a big deal? I mean, we take it for granted now.
Right. But back then, interacting with computers was a whole different beast. You had to use text commands. Not exactly intuitive.
Oh, not very user-friendly.
Nope. The GUI, though, with its windows and icons and that mouse thing, it made computing visual. Easy to understand. Suddenly, anyone could use a computer, not just, hardcore programmers.
And that's where the Xerox Alto comes in, right? This legendary machine.
The Alto, yeah. It was like a glimpse into the future of computing. It had it all. The GUI, the mouse, Ethernet, everything. But there was a catch.
What's the catch?
It was way too expensive, ridiculously expensive. Xerox just couldn't figure out how to bring it to market at a price that people could actually afford.
So they had this revolutionary technology just sitting there.
Pretty much. And they just didn't see its potential. They were still stuck in the copier mindset.
So enter Steve Jobs. He hears about Patek. At first, he's skeptical. I mean, who wouldn't be? But then he actually sees the GUI in action.
And what happened?
Well, in the YouTube video we mentioned, Jobs describes it as the best thing I'd ever seen in my life. Talk about a light bulb moment.
Yeah, you can just picture him, right? Eyes wide, mind blown.
Total game changer for him. He knew this was the future of computing.
And he wasn't going to let Xerox just sit on it.
You got it. Jobs, he had this vision. And he was, well, let's say he wasn't shy about going after what he wanted. He struck a deal with Xerox, Apple stock, for access to PARC's technology.
Hold on, so Xerox just handed over the keys to the kingdom?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. But yeah, essentially they gave Jobs a glimpse behind the curtain, and he soaked it all up.
And I'm guessing Xerox didn't realize what they were giving away.
It seems like they really underestimated the potential of what they had. They were too focused on their copiers, on the present, and not on what the future could hold.
Wow, that's got to be one of the biggest missed opportunities in tech history.
But hold on, there's another player in this story. While Jobs is busy absorbing everything at PARC, another major figure is watching closely. Bill Gates.
Oh, so this is where things get really interesting.
Right. Remember, Microsoft was working with Apple on software for the Macintosh at this time. And Gates, well, he had his own connections to PARC. Some former employees, I think.
So he was also in the loop, knew all about the GUI.
Exactly. Both Jobs and Gates had this inside knowledge. But Jobs, being Jobs, got Gates to agree that Microsoft wouldn't release any mouse-based software until a year after the Macintosh launched. Pretty clever, right?
Oh yeah, classic Jobs. Always thinking ahead, always trying to outmaneuver the competition.
But, as they say, the best laid plans often go awry.
Ooh, that sounds ominous. What happened?
Let's just say things didn't quite go according to plan. We'll pick up that thread in part 2 of this deep dive. Okay, so where were we? Oh yeah, Jobs, he's got this amazing idea, this vision for the future of computing.
But vision doesn't always translate to reality, right?
You got it. Turns out, getting from concept to finished product, not so simple. Pasted text actually mentions how Jobs' first attempt to bring the GUI to life with the Lisa computer was a total flop, like a big expensive flop.
Yeah, the Lisa didn't exactly set the world on fire, did it?
Nope. Took years of work, tons of dedication before the Macintosh finally came out in 1984.
And that right there is a perfect example of how innovation really works. It's not just about that initial spark of brilliance.
It's about the blood, sweat, and tears. The persistence to make that idea, that dream, into something real.
Exactly. And Jobs, for all his flaws, you gotta give him credit for that. His drive was incredible. He wouldn't let go of that vision for the Macintosh.
And he had a knack for the dramatic, too. Remember that iconic Super Bowl ad for the Macintosh? All about breaking free from the boring old computers, really tapped into something that resonated with people.
Absolutely. They positioned themselves as the rebels, the underdogs fighting against the big guys.
And that message really worked. Suddenly, computers weren't just for businesses and tech nerds.
They were cool. They were for creatives, for individuals, for anyone who wanted something different.
But the Macintosh wasn't an instant success, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't it more expensive than PCs at the time?
Yeah, and it had way fewer software options. That's where Gates and Microsoft came in. They took a different approach.
Less about the art, more about the business.
Exactly. While Jobs was focused on crafting this perfect, revolutionary product, Gates, he was thinking about widespread adoption, making Windows the industry standard.
Playing the long game.
And it worked. Microsoft partnered with IBM, got Windows pre-installed on millions of PCs. Suddenly, everyone was using Windows.
So it's like this clash of styles. Jobs, the artist, going for perfection, and Gates, the businessman, focused on conquering the market.
Yeah, and you could argue that Gates' strategy won out, at least in terms of numbers.
Definitely. By the late 80s, Microsoft was pretty much dominating the PC world.
But there's a twist. Pasted text actually highlights how Jobs leaving Apple in 1985 was a turning point. Kind of a blessing in disguise.
Wait, how's that a good thing? He got ousted from his own company.
Right, but while Gates was solidifying Microsoft's position, Jobs went on to found NXT, bought Pixar. He was laying the groundwork for his big comeback.
Talk about a second act. So what's happening with Microsoft while Jobs is off doing his thing?
They weren't exactly cruising along. Antitrust lawsuits, the rise of open source software like Linux, new challenges were popping up everywhere.
And then, of course, a little company called Google enters the scene.
The tech world was changing fast. And then, boom, in 1997, Jobs returns to Apple.
Like a conquering hero. And everything changes. The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone. It was a revolution.
Jobs and Apple completely transformed how we use technology. And to think, it all started with those researchers at Xerox PARC.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it, how these ideas can have such a ripple effect?
Yeah, something that starts as a small, almost accidental innovation ends up impacting millions, even billions of people.
And both Jobs and Gates, even with all their rivalry, they were instrumental in bringing those innovations to the masses. Crazy to think about. But hold on, what happened to Xerox in all of this? They were the ones who kicked it all off.
Xerox. It's a classic tale of what not to do.
They had the brains, the resources, the groundbreaking ideas, but
They just couldn't capitalize on any of it. They totally missed the boat on the whole digital revolution. Talk about a missed opportunity.
it makes you wonder if Xerox had embraced the GUI, brought the Alto to market, pushed those boundaries, would the tech world be completely different today?
It's a big what if. Maybe they could have been the Apple or Microsoft of their time.
But instead, they're a cautionary tale. No matter how big you are, you can't just rest on your laurels.
You have to be looking ahead, anticipating change. Be willing to adapt, even if it means shaking things up. Sometimes that shakeup comes from the outside.
From smaller, hungrier companies who aren't afraid to take risks, like Apple and Microsoft, they saw the opportunities Xerox missed and pounced on it.
Exactly. And isn't it interesting how that rivalry between Jobs and Gates, which was sparked by what they saw at Xerox PARC, ended up creating two of the biggest tech giants in the world?
Competition can be a powerful force for change, but it also makes you think, where's the line between being inspired by someone and just outright copying them?
That's a question we're still grappling with today, isn't it? Especially in the tech world.
This whole story of the UI is a great example of how innovation is rarely a solo act. It's about ideas bouncing around, getting tweaked, borrowed, combined.
And eventually they become something new and exciting.
So we've seen how Xerox fumbled the ball, how Jobs was driven by perfection, and how Gates played the game strategically. What a story.
It's a wild ride through the early days of personal computing, that's for sure.
But it feels like this deep dive has uncovered something even bigger, a question about how innovation really happens.
I think you're right. This story makes you think about the relationship between inspiration and imitation, about how competition can fuel incredible progress.
Where do great ideas come from? How do they spread? And how do they end up shaping the world around us?
And the answers aren't always clear-cut. Sometimes it's a messy process with lots of twists and turns and unexpected consequences.
It's like we've been detectives, tracing the path of an idea. And it makes you realize that even the simplest tech we use every day has this fascinating history full of intrigue and questions that are still relevant today. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like those researchers at Xerox PARC, they basically laid the foundation for how we use tech today.
Oh, absolutely. And remember, the GUI wasn't their only groundbreaking idea.
Oh yeah, what else did they come up with?
Well, there was Ethernet networking and laser printing. Even some of the early ideas behind object-oriented programming came out of PARC. All massively important stuff.
Wow, so they were like a breeding ground for innovation?
It's even crazier to think that Xerox didn't take advantage of any of it.
Yeah, it really shows you that there's a difference between just inventing something and actually understanding how to make it work in the real world.
Xerox was so focused on physical copies that they completely missed the whole digital wave. It's a good lesson for any business, really.
A cautionary tale.
Yeah.
You can't just assume you'll always be on top.
You got to be looking ahead, seeing the changes coming, and being ready to adapt, even if it means shaking things up a bit.
And sometimes that shakeup comes from outside forces.
It's like from smaller, hungrier companies who aren't afraid to take risks.
Exactly. In this case, it was Apple and Microsoft who saw the opportunity Xerox missed. They jumped in and changed the game.
And think about it, that whole rivalry between Jobs and Gates, that was sparked by what they saw at Xerox PARC, right? Oh yeah, that initial spark led to the creation of two of the biggest tech giants in the world.
It really shows you how powerful competition can be. But it does make you wonder about that line between being inspired by someone and just copying them.
That's a really tricky question, isn't it? One we're still debating today.
Especially in the fast-paced world of tech. But this whole GUI story really highlights how innovation is rarely a solo effort.
Right. It's more like a collaborative process. Ideas get tossed around, borrowed, tweaked, and eventually they become something new and exciting.
So let's recap. We've talked about Xerox's missed opportunities, Jobs' drive for perfection, Gates' strategic moves to dominate the market. What a journey.
It's amazing how these seemingly separate stories all connect together, isn't it?
It's like a tangled web, but it all leads back to that one moment at Xerox PARC.
And it really makes you think about how innovation happens, how those little sparks of creativity can have these massive ripple effects.
It's not just about the technology itself, it's about the people behind it, the rivalries, the challenges, the triumphs. It's the human element that makes it all so fascinating.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, right? Uncovering these stories, exploring a history of technology, and understanding how it all shapes our lives.
Exactly. So we've come to the end of our deep dive into the origins of the GUI. We've seen how it all began, how it evolved, and the impact it's had on the world.
Hopefully you've learned something new, gained a new perspective on the tech you use every day.
And maybe you've even been inspired to do some digging of your own.
There are so many amazing stories out there just waiting to be discovered, so keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.